All right, here we go. Let's get this started. Start. Well, it says the webinar has started. All right, here we go. I'll stop talking. I think you're the host, right?
I think I'm the host. Am I the host?
You're the host,
Hello,
Adrian.
everybody. Welcome. This is the Four Conversations Book Club. If that's what you're looking for, you are in the right place, hopefully at the right time. My name is Adrian McIntyre. I run a communication strategy firm called Speed of Story, and I am a coach at Win Without Pitching. And it is my pleasure to be hosting or emceeing these four book club sessions. So I want to start by welcoming you. And let's just talk a little bit about what we're going to do here. So this is a book club, and this is the book. We are going to work through this book together over the next 4 Tuesdays. And so the premise of this is that you've read the book, or at least you've read the chapter that we're talking about. And if you haven't read the chapter for today, you have extra homework before next week. Darius thinks this is such a great book.
Thank you,
Darius
Darius.
is correct. Um, so, how this is going to go is that we will have Blair review the key points of each of the four conversations, one per week. And then this is really focused on discussion. Rose, audiobooks are books. So you're all right. Um, so we're really focused on discussion here. And how this is going to work is because we're the only ones on camera and with audio, you're going to use the chat and the Q&A here in Zoom in order to do that. In fact, you can start using the Q&A to post your questions now because Blair's going to talk for just a few minutes. And then we'll get right into dealing with questions. We really do want this to be lively. Now, the chat is where everything else can go. And what I love about Win Without Pitching chats is they are lively and interactive and ongoing. So you can start now posting questions in the Q&A and in the chat. Let's hear from everybody. Where in the world are you right
I could
now?
just sit here and chat with everybody. I see the Garcia brothers are here, Miami, Anna Lee, and Sweden. So many familiar names. Already one shout out of my wardrobe. Good. We're done here. All right.
That's right.
Liege,
Remember,
Belgium.
chat goes in the chat. Questions go in the Q&A. It's the perils of Zoom that we have to do it like this. So we're going to jump right in, everyone. I love seeing the chat fire off like this. I have a separate screen over here, and it's just going so fast I can hardly see it, and that's awesome. Uh, Blair, we're here to talk about your book. Now, you've been talking about the contents of this book in various forms for easily a decade, maybe more.
Yeah,
Um,
I've lost track.
yeah.
Yeah.
And yet, this is the first time that you codified everything in one place, becomes the sole source of truth, as they say. But why did you want to do this? Why this book, and why should we be doing this book club now?
Yeah, why this book? So this is I think of this book a couple of ways. First of all, it's the here's how to follow up to the Win Without Pitching manifesto. And second, probably more importantly, it's effectively our training program in a book. So I labored with the question of whether or not I should put all this into a $30 book. I mean, many of you own Pricing Creativity, and that book is priced between $100 and $320. It's a high ROI subject, pricing, as is selling, and this book has some of that information from Pricing Creativity, the very basics in it. So I did labor with this, but I wanted to get it out there in the public realm. I wanted the four conversations to be known. And I also wanted to switch our training program from a place where you showed up to learn, like for where I and other coaches like you, Adrian, download information to people, to a place where they have a base level of information, and now we're practicing the four conversations. So we've already made that switch, and we just have way more practice time built into all of our training. So it will cannibalize some training. And anybody who takes their model, anybody who runs a training business takes their model and puts it out into the world. That's fine. Somebody wants to pay $30 and go do it themselves. I want to support them, and that's why we're doing the book club.
Yeah, I always say
This
that
this is like
the
training light. It's not quite training. It's not a
it's nothing
workshop.
like training. So my metaphor, you like metaphors. My metaphor is the workshop, the Win Without Pitching workshop, is like 4 day intensive hockey camp. Day one is skating, day two is shooting, day three is passing, day four is what fighting, probably
Yeah.
punching. And so you can't even in 4 days master the skills in hockey, but you'll certainly get a lot more attention than you would if you read the book about hockey. So three distinct things: reading, practicing,
Yeah.
and then actually doing the thing. All right, you want to jump into to the four conversations? Give us an overview of where
Yeah.
this is all going.
Let me know if this is working.
It is.
There's Daniel Craig, as my friend Kindwood says, reading the book. So, the Four Conversations Book Club, this is chapter one, the Probative Conversation. I don't even, I know it's like I wrote the book not too long ago. I think they're chapters, maybe they're sections, but we call it chapter one. I have to confess, I've never been a part of a book club. All I know is that the first rule of book club is you must talk about book club. So please go ahead and,
I think Oprah's the one who originally created that rule for Oprah's book club. But anyway,
right. Yeah. So it's on the book, The Four Conversations. The subtitle is A New Model for Selling Expertise. I don't want to spend too much time, like a part of me wants to go into like keynote speech mode, and I don't want to do that. I want to assume a level of knowledge. So you understand that this is a model. The Four Conversations is a model. You understand that all models are wrong, some are useful. So I'm not saying it's correct that the sale happens in a series of four linear and discrete conversations. I'm saying it can be useful or helpful to think of the sale that way. So that's the model. And these are the four conversations. They are the probative conversation, the qualifying conversation, the value conversation, and the closing conversation. And I'll review each of the four conversations and their objective at the beginning of each of the four book clubs we're doing, each of the four chapters. So when you have this model, this idea that we choose to see the sale as a series of four linear and discrete conversations, then it allows you to do something. Number one, at any point in the sale, you simply stop and ask yourself, wait a minute, what conversation is this? It's the qualifying conversation. Okay, number two, what is my objective in this, the qualifying conversation? It's to vet the lead to see if an opportunity exists and determine the next steps. Great. Um, what framework do I, now that I know where I'm going, the objective of the conversation, what framework do I use to navigate to that objective? I use the qualifying conversation framework. Now, in addition to frameworks, the book also contains principles. So it's a model, a view of the world. It's not right, can be useful. And in that model, we have frameworks. We have four conversations. We have frameworks for navigating to the objective of each conversations, but we also have principles. And principles in the book are the ideas that you embody, the key ideas that you embody as you are using, excuse me, the key ideas that you embody as you are using the framework to navigate to a conversation's objective. So that's the model in a nutshell. I'll go over the objective of each of the four conversations. So the first, the probative conversation, that is our topic for today, where your objective is to prove your expertise to the client and then move in their mind from this position of a vendor to the expert. So this is a dichotomy that will come up a lot throughout the four chapters, throughout the four conversations, the entire book. This idea, it's a generalization, not like a model, not necessarily true, but helpful to think of it this way. The generalization is you, in your relationships with your clients and prospects, there are only two positions that you can occupy. One is a vendor with very little power in the buy-sell relationship, and the other is the expert. So that's the probative conversation. That's the objective of the probative conversation. The second conversation is the qualifying conversation. This is the vetting conversation, where you're vetting the lead to see if an opportunity exists to determine the next steps. Now, there's a secondary objective here, which is while maintaining the expert position. That's a function of the primary objective of, that is the primary objective of the probative conversation, to move from vendor to expert, from powerless to powerful. And then when you get to the second conversation and the third and the fourth, Each of these three subsequent conversations has a secondary objective, and that is to not give up the high ground that you've worked so hard through the probative conversation to gain. The third conversation is the value conversation. This is where you're seeking to determine the value that you might help to create and the share of that value you might command in fees, again, while maintaining the expert position in the relationship. And the fourth conversation is the closing conversation, where your objective is to help the client select and commit to a path forward while maintaining the expert position. All right, let's go back to the first conversation, the probative conversation. This is what we're talking about today, in which we prove our expertise and move in the mind of the client from this position of a vendor to the position of the expert. Now, I'll just list and very quickly, very quickly talk about each of the key principles and frameworks. And then I'm going to hand it back to you, Adrian. I see we already have some questions, and we'll just get to the questions. And there's a whole bunch I want to say, and most of what I want to say, I'll be able to say through answering the questions that are posed.
Perfect.
So this idea of the principles, the first, I'm not sure if it's listed as a principle, but this phrase, the flip, was coined by a client of ours many years ago now. He now coaches for us as well. The flip is the moment in time, the name we give to the moment in time when the objective of the probative conversation is reached. It's the moment in time when you move in the mind of the client from powerless vendor to expert, where you have some power in the sale. And you can use that power to push back on an arduous selection process, to defend your fees, to push some of the cost of sale to the buyer, to the client. But I point out in the book that most of you have seen the flip happen in real life. You've witnessed that moment where you were in a sales conversation and the client's arms were crossed, and it was pretty clear that they saw themselves as the prize to be won, and you were lucky to be in that room or on that call. And then at some point during the conversation, you said something. You either made an observation or you asked a really smart question. And in that moment, everything changed. The body language opens up. If there's more of one of them, more than one of them, the first sign you notice is the look. They look at each other with a look that says, oh, this one's different. And then they lean forward, their note-taking device opens up, and they start asking questions and writing down your answers. That is the moment we're looking for. Now, the key to the probative conversation is this moment, the flip, and the entire conversation happens without you present. The flip is a conversation that happens through your agents, the agents of reputation building, typically the thought leadership that you put out in the world, and the referrals from your very best clients. So what others are saying about you. That is the key to the probative conversation. That is what makes it so different from the three subsequent conversations. For this one, the idea of a conversation is more of a construct of the conversation you have with people over time to build your reputation. Now, in addition to moving from, in the mind of the client, from vendor to expert, you're looking to drive inbound inquiries with you already in the expert position. I'm sure you all agree that there's a night and day difference between the inbound call who Googled you and you showed up on like page 2. I guess nobody Googles anything anymore. But who knows a little bit about you? You're on a list of others just like you, and you have no power in the buy-sell relationship. There's a difference between that and somebody who's been reading your blog or watching your YouTube videos or saw you speak or read your book or whatever it is, and they reach out. They already see you as the expert. You're in the high ground. You're occupying the high ground. So that's what we're looking to happen. And if we look at the frameworks on the right, we see that the frameworks for the probative conversation are the frameworks of positioning. How do you position yourself? Of adding perspective and of generating leads. So that's kind of the first principle that we talk about. It's not really a principle, but we give a name to this moment in time when you move from vendor to expert. The first principle is what you see on your screen next, P equals DB over D. And that formula, we may end up talking about it. Your power in the sale, excuse me, your power in the sale, which is P, is a function of your desirability, DB, being greater than your own desire, D. Otherwise stated, whoever wants it the most, the engagement, has the least power. So it's just a reminder to ourselves, and there's a lot of unpacking of this principle in the book, but it's a reminder to pay attention to the power dynamics in the relationship and not give all your power away for sale. It's such an important principle. We put it on the back of our Win Without Pitching coffee mugs. And then the last principle is one of perspective. It's the idea that we make the final battle one of ideology. So the way we think about positioning, it's three legs of a stool, and there's two main legs, discipline and market. What do you do, and for whom do you do it? The third leg of the positioning stool is your overarching belief on how this should be done, discipline for market should be done. That goes by the term point of view, perspective, ideology. That is a secondary differentiator that also sets you apart from others who also do what you do. So I'm going to quit talking now. I'll just review the frameworks of positioning, and the frameworks. There are some prompts for each of these in the book, and then links to some frameworks that you can use on winwithoutpitching.com. The frameworks of positioning the firm, the frameworks of developing a perspective, and last week I did a live lesson, which is a deep dive into this is us covering a conversation in 1 hour. Every week I do a 1 hour deep dive into something really narrow for our clients. And I did this last week on adding perspective, a really interesting, valuable conversation on different frameworks for developing your perspective. So
And
positioning,
Blair, where do you
perspective,
do
and lead
those
generation.
deep dives?
That's available in Win Without Pitching Academy. It's currently available only to our clients. If you stick with us through a couple of these, there may be an opportunity for you to gain access to that. That's all that I'm saying at this point.
That was actually not intended to be a setup. I didn't know that, but that's good to know. That's really good.
Perfect. That was a perfect softball. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
I'll
welcome.
stop right there. And then lead generation is just like how do you in the book, there's the framework for the ladder of lead generation, the way you organize all of your lead generation activities with the high status activities that are designed to engender the flip and drive inbound inquiries at the top, and then low status but more immediate activities at the bottom. So outreach activities. Eventually, as an expert, you want to climb the ladder over time. It's pretty rare that you get away from doing outreach altogether, but we think of a balanced lead generation plan. And this ladder of lead generation is a way for you to organize your lead generation activities so that over time, you're driving more inbound inquiries with the flip already having happened. And I'll just finish by saying in the last workshop that I led, which was a couple of months ago, there was somebody who, a new employee at one of our clients who went through the training 5 years ago. And he made the point that 5 years ago, it was all outbound lead generation. And today it's all inbound lead generation with the flip having happened. It's not done immediately. 5 years is impressive. It can be done sooner than that, but it is a bit of a long game. Okay, I'll stop there. That's enough of me talking at you, Adrian, and I'll hand it over to you to
Yeah.
hit me
Well,
with
we've got
questions.
a lot to get to. So I had some questions. I'll save them if we need filler later, but we may not. Let's just knock off a couple of really simple ones. Milos and everyone, yes, the recordings for this will be available on the Win Without Pitching YouTube channel at the end of the 4-part series. So please come live and engage with us here. Recordings will be there later. And then two quick and easy ones. Spencer wanted to know how long did it take you to write the book, and Eric was wondering how much you paid for the suit. You maybe only need to answer one of those.
I paid 299 for the 299 euros for this jacket in Rovine, Croatia last week. And $12 to H&M for the t-shirt 8 years ago. So how long did it take me to write the book? It takes me 8 years to write a book. I found my first notes on this. They're 10 years, over 10 years old. I'm a horrible writer of books. It is the most painful and most rewarding thing that I do. If I could cut this to 4 years to write a book, and I'm determined, I actually I'm starting a next book project in my head. I think I can get this done in a year. We'll see.
Yeah.
It's not the answer you want to hear that will inspire you to write books.
Well, it's interesting. Tom had asked, "How do you make it look so easy?" But I think you just answered that question. It's not
It's
easy.
just
And
pain.
thank you.
It's nothing but pain.
Somebody said I spent years in the wrong roles where I was required to write for everything, like being an academic and being a journalist. Um, and I don't like writing. Somebody said, "How do you write?" And I said, "Well, it's really easy. You just sit down at the typewriter, paraphrasing Hemingway or somebody, and then you just smash your head on the typewriter until your soul spills out." You know,
Yeah, that's
no,
about
no
it.
big deal. No big deal. All right, so we got a lot of really good questions here, and there's some that are super nuanced um, and worth digging into. So we're going to try to get to as many of these as we can, and then we'll find ways to answer the rest through content or through comments or things of that nature. So, um, but
These
Tim in
questions,
London,
by the way, that we don't answer, they will keep me busy for a while. I'll be writing blog posts on this, and in the academy, I post daily, so I'll be writing on this stuff starting tomorrow. But go ahead.
perfect, and you're very active on LinkedIn now as well with very meaning more
Sporadically.
than two
Yeah.
years ago. Um, so you do answer questions there. All right. Tim in London asks a really important question about being brave, specifically with regard to choosing a niche perspective. And the fear is, so I think this is with regard to vertical positioning. The fear is that prospects won't want to work with their competitors' agency. How do you deal with that balancing the imperative to specialize, the
Yeah.
first proclamation, with this idea that your competitors might not want to work with their, your prospects might not want to work with their competitors'
That
expert.
that's the fear of a generalist, and I don't mean that to be disparaging. It is legitimately a fear. So if you're seen as a general service provider and you have a big client, big for you in the space, and they're a large percentage of your revenue, and they feel like they are your special client, they don't want you to work with their competitors. But you think of when you hire a specialist, and my thinking on this, like, or my language on this comes from David Baker. um, you hire a specialist. What are you hiring, and why are you willing to pay a premium? Well, because they know your space. So how do they know your space? By working with your competitors. There's actually now they're paying you a premium for the fact that you work with their competitors. So it is really only an issue when you are a generalist and when you're moving from a generalist position to a specialist position with maybe one client. And I like to say, if a client says, "Hey, like you can't be working with our client, with our competitors," I think you should put a slight smile on your face, respond like you just won the lottery, and say, "Hey, if you're interested, I'd be happy to sell you category exclusivity." Like there's a big price on that. And that only works when you're a generalist. I promise you, this problem goes away quickly. When you specialize, this problem goes away quickly, which, part of your question is around courage, Tim. So there are frameworks for how you move from your current positioning to your new positioning. And if you can't bring yourself to basically turn the whole ship around, launch what we call a skunk works project, just to launch a secondary brand that is highly specialized and begin to put most of your marketing efforts behind the specialist brand. And at some point, that's a falsifiable experiment. It will prove that this is the future or it is not. And that's one way to make the transition without having to summon quite as much courage.
There's a number of questions that we might get to in your answer to this one, which has to do with lead generation before the flip. So I think the idea here is before you are seen as the expert, uh, let's talk about the ladder of lead generation a little bit. Um, how do you think about starting lead generation when you're not seen as the expert? It's easy, Blair, it's easy for you to say. You've been speaking and writing about these things for 20 years. What
Yeah,
are
and
we
I've come
supposed
to
to
the
do?
realization. So we did a live lesson deep dive on this a few weeks or a few months ago. And when I was delivering this, one of our core values is do what we say. So I'm talking about it was called Outreach for Experts. We do a lot of lead generation stuff in the academy. And so I was leading a discussion on this, and as I'm laying out my key principles for how experts should do outreach, it occurred to me. So I said out loud, "It's like, you know what? I owe it to you to model this, to be able to do this. So my commitment to you is that I'm going to start doing this. I'm going to build the muscle, the routine of doing outreach regularly." And I committed to it, and we formed this little study group. So a bunch of us are going through this together, and we met a month later, and most of us, myself included, we did very little. Now, one or two people ran some really meaningful experiments, and the rest of us learned a ton. By the end of that session, I've determined that I am committed to getting better at this. I also think that we're in this in between period with AI where we go from Google as the authority to the LLMs as the authority, and the LLMs are being gamed right now in the way it's like we're in the keyword stuffing era of LLMs. It's not exactly keyword stuffing, but it's close enough. And we do a guest expert every month in the academy. We had Will Reynolds from Seer Interactive come on and talk to us about just this, which is how do you create content in the age of AI? And he showed us how the system is being gamed right now. And his advice was play the long game. Anyway, I think I think Outbound is more important than ever, and I've made the commitment to myself that I'm going to become a master of Outbound. I'm going to build a practice, a steady muscle of doing it and doing it respectfully. It is one of these things where if you can build this muscle, it will just keep throwing off leads in perpetuity. Now, I write books. I have a successful podcast that's been going for years. I do speeches. Um, I have a blog with 30,000 people on it. I I am at the top of maybe not the top, but I operate mostly high up on the ladder of lead generation. But I also realize that I'm just too comfortable up there. There is something about outreach that gives you direct feedback from the market. When people say no and they say why it's no, you learn so much. So I'm become a bit of a renaissance man on outreach. I think we all need to learn to do this well.
Let's lean into this a little bit more because there are a number of questions. I will try to weave them in as I can. One of the things that's implicit here in the ladder of lead generation is this notion of status. And I think this is probably related to power equals desirability over desire. In other words, it's low status to look like you want it too bad. It's high status to seem a little bit more discerning, selective, etc. There's also this idea tied in with status about where the validation comes from. Is this you telling everybody that you're great? Or are there others who are platforming you literally on their stage or providing other forms of validation and so on? And in the questions here, an anonymous question, which I think is very good, says, I worry that the probative conversation sounds a little bit like doing too much talking about ourselves on the front end and not enough listening about the client. Could you speak to that? So there's a number of threads here, and I do want to come back to this to question about what has status now. But let's
Yeah.
start with this. How do you think about this status thing? Who's doing the talking and
Well,
how that plays
that's
in?
an interesting the way the questioners posed the question. It's interesting because my first reaction is, well, I'm not talking about me when I'm out there. And then the truth is, I probably talk about me and us way too much. And that's just a personal kind of failing. Um, every once in a while, the personal stories are meaningful, but I'm typically talking about more abstract principles, and I could probably do a better example of do a better job of citing examples of those abstract principles. So it's not self-promotion. The idea is, and we're a training company, we sell productized services. So, a lot of our emails that go out, there's a sales message in there somewhere. But the idea is the content should be worth reading on its own. It's not. It's like, oh, here it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be seen as, oh, here's another self-promotional email from Win Without Pitching. It should be, oh, here's a here's something from somebody I trust or I'm ideologically aligned with on a subject that is of interest to me right now. And I should feel like I'm not going to open this up and read a whole bunch of self-promotion about how how I did this, look how great I am. So you could do it that way, but I, I think I'm intrigued by the question. I think it's a valid question, and I would have you think about yourself as serving and helping others through this content, not promoting yourself.
So related to this, on the issue of desirability versus desire, Melanie's asking, do you personally manage the balance? Does this have to do with being enthusiastic about the work, but not coming across as overly eager or needy? I mean, nobody wants to hire the yappy little dog at the side of the bulldog, right? And related is, how do you know if this is working? In other words, many of us have thought leadership. This is Joe. Many of us have thought leadership out there doing work on our behalf or to our detriment. What's the simplest audit we can do to refine our chances of having successful probative conversations we're not part of? And I will add my thought to this, which is silence, like the phone or the contact form not ringing, is not necessarily what you're looking for. It's not the answer. It's just the absence of information. So how do you actually find out?
Well, you find out by engagement, all the usual social stuff. People start sharing it, people are talking about it, your subscribes go up, etc. That's how you find out about it. If you're concerned that your marketing content, your thought leadership is not helping you with that probative conversation, I would suggest that the first place that you look is perspective. It's probably that your content lacks a perspective. It's not polarizing enough. So I'm fond of saying people engage with you for the content, for your writing or speaking about a very narrow sliver of your focus, your discipline for market. But they will hire you for the ideology. They will hire you because there's this resonance with not the content. Like anybody can publish a list of 10 ways to do whatever. Um, the resonance is the perspective, the belief, the ideology. And I say this in the book. I quote Simon Sinek. I always get the quote wrong, but it's something like, don't go looking to sell to people who need what you have. Go looking to sell to people who believe what you believe. And so via your perspective, you're trying to accomplish one of two things. Both its resonance one of two different ways. So the first way is you're talking about your overarching point of view or ideology on discipline for market, and it's a minority point of view. It's not the majority point of view. So when people hear it, it's like, whoa, that's different. The resonance you're looking for is somebody says, oh, I think about this the same way that you do. We are ideologically aligned. The other version of that is you convert somebody to your point of view. They think, oh my God, I've never thought about it that way before. And so now they're converted and they're a new convert to your ideology. I'm telling you, they will hire you for your ideology. And I think if I look at most of the content out there that doesn't work, it's just because you're doing something that an LLM could do and you might even be using an LLM to create it. We
Yeah.
don't
Now,
need we don't need more facts out there. I mean, I'm not trying to dismiss the importance of facts, but what we need are different novel points of view, different ways of looking at things.
I'm so glad you brought this up because this circles back to the question I held uh, for later, which is now, time being a flat circle, um, about the status of content, the perceived status of content. I believe there was a time, so you have on the ladder of lead generation, blog slash web content as part of educating. And of course, you know, since Brian Clark and or Joe Paluzzi invented the concept of content marketing, some nerd in the chat will point out that actually it was Ben Franklin with Poor Richard's Almanac, and the 1700s. But anyway, the last 10 years of SEO optimized and now AI generated content has flooded the internet with millions of meaningless words put together in coherent sentences amounting to nothing. The sound and fury, tale told by an idiot kind of a thing.
Yeah, I got that.
So some of the things under educating clearly have more status than others, potentially more power. Just as a side note, for some people get squirrely around the idea of power. I just want to add
Yeah.
something that I say sometimes in our workshops, which is if you think of power like physics rather than like domination, power is simply a measure of the time it takes to do work. And what you really want to do is great work with your clients. So having more power means you can do that better and more efficiently, quicker. So think of it like that if you wish. How are you thinking now about different types of educating? And there's a question in here from Chak as well that relates to this about Substack. He's asking, I believe they are asking, um, how much do I give away for free?
So the standard answer to that question is you give it all away for free. Oh, so maybe not all. There's stuff that I don't that I don't talk about. Um, Not a lot, but you give it all away for free. What you don't do is you don't apply that advice to somebody's business. So anybody who's a prolific content marketer will know the experience of having people email or direct message with questions about, hey, I read your post on this. Here's my situation. What do I do here? You can answer the odd one. I'll answer the odd one of those from past clients, more than the odd one from past clients or somebody that I've kind of gotten to know over a while. But for the most part, I just don't answer those. The answer is you've got to pay me to answer that question. I'm sorry, but like it's not your job to go all the way. It's your job to provide enough. Let's back to perspective. So there's the content, but this perspective is kind of the belief on it or the point of view on it. I think it's not just your job to deliver information. More pertinently, I think it's your job to get people to think differently about a very narrow sliver of discipline for market. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, you did. You answered part of it. And it's very similar to, and by the way, financial advisors and medical professionals never struggle with this because they know very clearly the difference between providing general educational information and a consultation, a client relationship. And in a regulated and licensed profession, that's usually the case. We're us unruly creatives are the ones who tend to struggle with this more. Um, there are several questions that are related to this, which have to do with um, earning the flip, Julie says, through writing and publishing as an expert. Is that the same thing as content marketing or building a personal brand? Is there a meaningful difference? It's a phrase we like, in your view. In other words, how would you categorize the activities, the thought leadership that you're doing? Is this the same as personal branding?
I don't, it might be. I'm just so put off by the phrase. I steer clear of it. It's probably personal branding is probably important. There's something about it that just triggers me. So, um, I don't know. Is it the same as, yeah, I guess it is. Personal brand.
Let me add
I
something
don't
to this.
know.
I haven't thought about this actually.
It's not, is it branding? I mean, just fuck branding. Like when it comes, like,
You really
get,
did just say that to an audience of creative
I know. I mean,
agencies. Yeah.
the problem is when we think about what we do and like how we're showing up in the world as part of our brand, it's not unimportant. But when we put the brand ahead of like being able to help people, like being able to be like becoming the expert, putting it out there, being known as the expert, being known as somebody who has a novel point of view on a subject and like thinks about things differently. Yeah, there are some branding implications of that. But if you go into it thinking I'm going to build a personal brand, I think you're doing it backwards. And you could make the argument to me, well, in the end we get to the same place. Maybe, but you're speaking to me about priorities and I would have you reverse your priorities.
Yeah, I think in this context, for an expert anyway, a personal brand, which is to say a reputation in our world, is an outcome. It's not the activity. If you're doing things in order to create a personal brand, it's just a different come from, which changes everything. The context matters a lot, but you will end up with a personal brand, whether you like it or not.
Think of David
Um,
C. Baker on LinkedIn, right? Like to me,
yeah,
he is like the grandfather or the godfather of LinkedIn. He's out there
certainly
keeping
the
the rest
grumpy
of
old
us
man at the
in
moment.
line. Do you think he's trying to build a personal brand? No, he's being David C. Baker, and he has built this brand that is like unmistakably David C. Baker, right? So, but
Yeah.
he's not trying to build the David C. Baker brand. He is, I guarantee you, he has never put those words together in a sentence, the David C. Baker brand, not once.
And if you said those words to him, he might never speak to you again. Yeah, it's just anathema. So, by the way, people are asking, well, what about case studies? There's a great one right there. Um, Not necessarily the brilliant and insightful David C. Baker of his books or of your Two Bobs co-host, but specifically the David C. Baker on LinkedIn. There is everything that you're talking about: a perspective, tone of voice, expertise, opinion. It's polarizing. A lot of it. It's a great example, actually. Credit where due. Christian asks, how does one uncover their unique perspective? And there were several other people who had asked, sorry if I can't call you out by name, who had asked about this as well. We spent a lot of time talking about this in the academy, and there's a lot more to say. How do you uncover it?
Yeah,
Is it
okay.
just something that
It's a
emerges
great
over
question. So
time?
there's
You have to go through the pain, or is there a way to be more
so
directed and
there are
focused?
a bunch of different ways, and I think when we covered this, might have even been last week. Uh, I had 5 ways to go about uncovering your perspective. So the first thing I'll say about it is you have to write. And I know some people don't write, some people speak. So whatever. To me, when I say write, I mean you have to create content. I think through my fingers. So I have to write about something to explore it, to fully understand it. So you have to experiment with perspective. You have to try different perspectives on. How do you find a perspective? So, what are the sacred cows in the market that you serve? So, the market that we've served historically, creative professionals, it's broader than that now, but creative professions, what's a sacred cow? The pitch, right? Our perspective is right there in the name of the business. I just got lucky. I didn't understand it at the time that's what I was doing. So, look for sacred cows. So here's my favorite place to find a perspective. Bring outside models in. Look to other fields. Look for some models that apply in other fields and bring them in. And I wrote a series of posts in the academy, turned it into a large post, sent it to the email list. David and I did a podcast on it. I think it's aired. It's called The Power of a Metaphor, where I had
Yeah.
5 different metaphors for selling. So selling is dating, don't like that one. Selling is parenting. Selling is leading. Selling is change management. Selling is facilitating. Um, and so in all of that work I did, I was talking about, if you can take what you do and say it's like this is like that, a metaphor where you say this is like that, that unlocks an entire new playbook. And the point that I made in these posts and in this podcast is if you're looking for new playbooks, new, slightly different playbooks on selling, and I say to you, selling is leading, then you can go read a book on leadership and you can apply it to selling. If I say to you, buying is changing, selling, therefore, is change management, then you can go read a book on change management and that can become your playbook for selling. So take what you do and try to find 3 or 4. Oh, this is like that. And in the post, I talked about when I was trying to learn to whitewater kayak and I was horrible at it. And the instructor said, kayaking's like skiing. And I immediately, in a minute, I just got it. It's like, oh, current is slope. I'm 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 carving with the wrong edge. I should fall down the hill. Like all these things just became immediately available to me and muscle memory.
Something
So
about your shoulders and,
yeah. So that's a great place to find a
Mm.
perspective. I'll give you one more. Look at the extent to which you've codified how you do what you do. Because out of perspective, a belief on how discipline for market should be done falls a way of working. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. If you really do believe that, you will codify a way of working that allows you to bring your perspective to bear. So in consulting engagements that I used to do, I would go into my clients' offices and I would look for uh, models, how they like usually in presentation decks of like, here's how we work. And I would try to see if there was a perspective built into a model, a way of working. So you can sometimes reverse engineer a perspective out of a way of working. So
Yeah.
those are
The way I
some.
explain it, we work directly on this with clients. The way like to think about it is there's at least three core factors involved. Uh, and the root of it all is who you are, because who you are shapes what you can see and what you will think. So, where have you been? What's happened to you along the way has shaped the you that is now developing a place to stand. That's the perspective. So now, where do you stand? What's the place from which you are looking out into the world? Remember, it's the you doing the looking, so that's foundational. And then the third is your point of view. So persona, if you will, perspective, where you stand, and point of view. And the point of view, we often talk about in Win Without Pitching and other places as well, is polarizing. In other words, there's a charge to it. It has energy. We're not interested in you recounting the best practices that every single person in your field would also recount. That's not a point of view. That's just competence. The
Yeah.
point of view is what do you think about this? Or what a place to get at it from is what upsets you about the norm? What are some things that really get you fired up and would have you, sort of pounding the table and lecturing people for a while? You'll find, and this is, if you need a place to look for this, read Nietzsche. But this is coming from the passions. This is coming from what gets you worked up, fired up, energized. That's where you'll find the point of view part.
That's the first time I've heard somebody um, inspired by Nietzsche when it comes to content. Although, no, I won't.
It's
I
my
won't.
point
Yeah,
of view.
yeah, totally.
That's where I come from anyway. Okay, we got a lot of really great questions in here. I'm doing my best to integrate them. I'm probably failing. Apologies to everybody about that. There's several here. Megan has one about determining unique value in a saturated market. And another person had also asked, how do you do this if you're small and the world, the marketplace is noisy? So let's talk about that. I think we've mentioned some things that relate to it, but how do you stand out in a sea of sameness and a noisy world?
Yeah, you're small and the marketplace is noisy. So you mentioned, Adrian, the need for polarization, and the need for polarization in your perspective is a function of competition density.
Mm.
So if you are in a what's the red ocean, it's just red with blood because there's so many sharks, right? It's a very competitive space. You need a really polarizing point of view to stand out. If you're in a more of a blue ocean, you don't need a polarizing point of view. Not today. You might want to work on one for the future when this space gets more crowded. So the short answer is you get more niche, more polarizing in your point of view. And, not everybody arrives at a perspective. Most businesses, most creative businesses, most knowledge businesses out there do not have a perspective at their core. um, Things just get so much easier. Content creation gets so much easier. IP development gets easier for the reason I've already stated, because out of a point of view on how this should be done falls a way of working. You keep refining that. And then ultimately, you might get to the point where you actually have some valuable, protectable IP. So all these things just get easier when you have a point of view. I forgot the question. I'm not sure if I answered it.
You did. How do you stand out? But it's related to that. So there's also some questions that are more specific. One person asked, "How does this? Have you had success with this?" I'm sorry, I'm trying to find it here. Have you had success with this specifically with regard to technical founders or engineer type principles? It wasn't specifically related to point of view, but let's bring in Othman's perspective here. Does this work
Yeah,
for
that's a
geeks and
great
nerds and
question.
engineers?
I haven't considered that before. I do have this engineering. friend, engineer friend in New Zealand, who many years ago now, like 5, 6 years ago, said to me, and I've written about him and his business. He said, this is in the pre-AI transformer days, so pre-GPT days. He said, engineering is likely to be one of the first professions disrupted by AI, so I might as well be the person to do it. And I thought, oh, that's a perspective. So he started working, acting on this way before anybody else, and is in a pretty good position on that today. Um, Now, is that a polarizing point of view today? No, it was. I thought he was a little bit crazy. He was just early, but he was, in hindsight, he wasn't even early. He was exactly on time.
Here's to the
So
crazy ones.
here's to the crazy ones. So maybe there's another example of that that's not kind of like so uh, omnipresent that is AI.
Yeah. Uh, Quickly, content from the company or content from the founder, the principal, the person
It's a
specifically?
great question.
Yeah.
I'm sorry to say, it almost certainly has to be the founder. Almost certainly has to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The only thing that human beings are reliably curious about over and over and over again are other human beings. There's just no way around it. And even if you think about, we didn't read the book Nike: A History. We read the book Shoe Dog.
Yeah, great point.
Okay, so uh, an advisory firm. We have an opportunity that is either on the bubble, meaning over the target, or go no go for us. In-person dinner with the principals soon, coming soon. Zoom is one thing, but what should we keep in mind communicating a no go before the food arrives? So, in other words, I think what Pete is asking here is, and this relates to, I think, some of the issues we might talk about next week in the qualifying conversation, but there's some discernment, there's some red lines, there's some things you will and won't do. Unless I'm misunderstanding Pete's question, how do you handle that in person, over dinner, during the appetizer course?
So that is a qualifying conversation question that is more appropriate for next week. What I would say to you is you should qualify before you get to dinner. And it's not always the case. Like you get an invite to dinner from somebody whom like you would just snap their hand off to be able to have dinner with them. Go have dinner. Um, and then, and then use the qualifying conversation framework to in dinner itself. And if it's a no-go, you just tell them it's a no-go. And we'll talk about this next week. It's like, how do you, when you're qualifying out, what's the language that you use? How do you communicate that there isn't a good fit? And we'll save that
Uh,
until next week.
Related, but a different circumstance. Another anonymous question. We tend to have an internal champion at the client who is a director level and wants to work with us. How can we help raise this expert perspective to their VPs and C suite who don't know us?
Sorry, can you read that again,
Yeah.
Adrian? I got
So
distracted.
the question is about, you've got an internal champion, they're a director. You need to raise your expert position and you need the flip to happen above them with
Yeah,
VPs and the C suite. How do you raise your expert perspective to the decision makers who don't know you?
it's a great question. So one way is to ask to get in front of those decision makers, but the better way is for you to have something that you've created, a video, a white paper, a book, etc., that is that has seeks ideological resonance. So what I often say if I have a sales conversation with somebody who's not the decision maker and it's the founder of the firm's not available and it's like they've delegated this to somebody else. I always say, listen, I've written a short, I've written a 48,000 word book, The Four Conversations, and I've written a 24,000 word ideology book. Give them the ideology book. 2 hours, 2.5 hours, they can read this book. At the end of that book, they will want to have a conversation with me or they won't. And if they do, then we will go to the next step. So you have some sort of piece of thought leadership that's not 24,000 words is a lot. It's not a lot for a book, but it's a lot. It's a lot. Maybe a white paper, something. Give it to them and have them give it to the person you're trying to get to.
There's a Win Without Pitching client did the workshop, I believe last year, maybe earlier, who is a video focused creative firm, and they produced a series, a video series explicitly for this purpose. It shared their perspective and their point of view, and also implicitly showed a bit of their creative content. And the purpose was this is something someone could share with other people internally. It was not quote unquote marketing. It was positioning. Okay, we are coming up on the end of time, and there are so many questions here we haven't gotten to. Let me pick one last one, and then Blair, you're going to close us out with some next steps. Uh, Let me just summarize this because there was a number of questions that talked about outreach. So you mentioned in particular wanting to get better at outreach yourself, and some of these questions are: what are you going to do, and how do you do that without losing the expert position in the process? I mean, you're known as the win without pitching guy. If you start cold calling people, what does that do to your reputation? Maybe that's not really the question, but how do you do outreach without losing?
Well, there's a way to do it respectfully, and there's a model for it. I think it's on the website. I think it's called the maybe Avery can find it and post a link in the chat. I think it's called the prospector email or my prospector email. It's basically you take the outcome of your positioning framework, positioning statement, reassurance statement, and you add a third sentence and you modify it. And you reach out to people. You want to be, excuse me, you want to be targeted. You want to be respectful, therefore very, very short. And you want to ask a closed-ended question. Now, you can take this and you can scale it up with AI and marketing automation, and then it is what it is. It becomes spam. So, and we talk about that in outreach for experts. Like there, we are. It is so tempting to use the tools of scale, and as soon as you do that, like forget it. Like go do something else. You're over. Like you're a spammer. It's done. If you're using burner email domains, like burn in hell, you're a spammer, right? But this idea of identifying 20, 40, 50 people, organizations you can best help, taking a template and handcrafting it, like very succinct value prop. Here's what we do, here's who we work with and how we help them. And then the closed-ended question. Feel free to say no if you don't see it fit, but allow me to ask, are you interested in exploring this with me? Would you like to learn more? Is this of interest to you? Closed-ended question that they can answer yes or no to. Now, this used to work great, and I get spam versions of this like all day, every day. So there is something about taking the time to break through, modifying it, adding actually meaningfully distinct content that is specific to them, not dumping it into your email automation platform, not using AI to fill in blanks, etc. That's like we are going the whole world is going in that direction. And the conversations we're having within our client base in the Win Without Pitching Academy, we're all going the other way. Um, and I'm just convinced that that's the way to do it. And so you make a habit, a ritual, a practice of doing a little bit of this every day. And
Yeah,
I
I'm
have
fond
to
of saying
admit,
people
it's
don't need a.
hard. I haven't been I try to write every day. Now I'm trying to do outreach every day. It's really, really hard, but I will get there. I am determined to solve for this.
Yeah, I'm fond of saying you don't need a marketing plan, you need a marketing habit. And that
Oh,
means
good.
something like BJ Fogg at Stanford's idea of flossing one tooth. What's the one thing you're going to do every day without fail? All right, we're out of time. There's so much good stuff here. I would love for you to respond to John Gleason's wink, wink, nudge, nudge about doing this for procurement specifically. But we don't have time for that. So, John, bring that question back. It's a good one.
Yeah.
And everyone, thank you so much for
Hold on.
those. Blair, what's happening here? What are we
Yeah,
doing?
so I'm just going to share. These are the things that you should be able to do. This is from a document we create called the Progress Tracker about the probative conversation. Take a screenshot of that. And then I know we're at time here in 30 seconds. I wanted to plug some workshops that we have coming up. So I do quarterly workshops, public workshops once a quarter online. The next one's in July. Um, this one does not work for our friends in Europe. This is the one we do for an APAC friendly audience. So I'm in Pacific time in North America. It's from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. my time. If you want information on these, you can follow the links um, or follow the QR codes. We're doing two rare in real life workshops also in July. One in Buenos Aires, run by Ezzy Applebaum, who's our coach down there. It's this one's in Spanish, and it's priced for the South American market. So if you want more information on that, if you want more information on any of this, you can email us info@winwithoutpitching. And then London, Aaron Hutchinson, our coach in London, just spent some time with him 2 weeks ago. He's running a workshop in London, July 9th and 10th in central London. You want information on that, follow those links. So these are the workshops. And then if you're not signed up for book club, you can sign up at the link at the bottom of the screen. And we will see you next week when we talk about chapter 2, the qualifying conversation. Thanks for everybody's questions and participation. That was great. This could be 4 hours long. It won't be, but it could be.
Thanks, everybody. Look forward to seeing you next time.
Cheers. Bye bye.